The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that may result from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. This is Max, George.
And this is Nathaniel Darkish. And we have a very special guest with us today, author Grady Hendrix.
It's good to be a king.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And Grady, I'm super nervous. Your book that I just read was amazing.
Oh.
So, fangirling a little bit.
Oh, no. I enjoy that. It gives me an enormous ego. Which book?
My best friend's Exorcism.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Abby and Gretchen, I love those gals. They're out there somewhere in the world still making friends, which is really nice.
As a massive 80s fan, I was born in 1990, so I barely missed it. But good God, that book was spectacular.
Thank you.
So I guess, could you introduce yourself a little bit, Grady, our audience who doesn't know?
Yeah, I'm Grady. I write things. I was a journalist for about 10 years, and these days I write mostly books and movies. I wrote Horrorstör about a haunted Ikea, and my best friend's Exorcism that takes place during the Satanic Panic about two best friends in 10th grade who become convinced that one of them's possessed by Satan. And my last novel was We Sold Our Souls, it's a heavy metal horror novel. And then my new book is coming out in March of next year, which I don't want to reveal too much about. And I've got a movie in post-production right now called Satanic Panic, and I wrote a movie called Mohawk, and a couple of other bits and pieces here and there. Oh, and I wrote Paperbacks From Hell, which is a nonfiction book from, I guess, 2017, which is a history of the horror paperback boom of the 80s and 90s.
And that won a Stoker-award.
Yes, it did. And I do a live version of that where I sing and do an oral version of the book. And I'm actually working right now on a live version of a sequel to Paperbacks From Hell. Not a book, but a live show that'll be a sequel. Paperbacks From Hell to Think of the Children, which will be about teen fiction between 1967 and 1997.
Well, that sounds awesome.
I was just sitting here before I got on with you guys reading wilderness terror books published in the 60s and the 80s. Yeah, innocent teens. They thought they'd have a simple summer, and then they wind up trapped, surviving by their wits and eating squirrels in the woods while evil people, usually bank robbers, stalk them. But the good news is they often lose weight in the process.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, that was the one I just finished, which it starts with this girl with her mom telling her she's a little chunky, and then the single-engine plane she's taking to Alaska to visit her divorced dad crashes, and she has to hike out over hundreds of miles of wilderness. And it turns into this really philosophical, existential girl against nature thing. And she comes into her own. And you're like, wow, this book was actually really good. And then she gets home and she's like, oh my God, I lost 20 pounds. Now I can fit into my Calvin Klein jeans. The end.
Move over, keto diet.
Exactly. Just get in a plane that crashes. Although, I guess in Alive they lost weight too. That was like a paleo diet, super high on the protein.
All right, Grady. Well, if you don't mind, we'd love to just kind of dive in.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, so you've mentioned, obviously, a lot of contributions to the horror genre. Can you tell us maybe some of your favorite horror books and movies? What were a few that you found the most frightening? Some of your favorites? Stuff like that?
Well, horror doesn't really scare me. It's I like the genre. I don't know, it doesn't scare me. But although I will say, when I was in high school, I loved Evil Dead 2, and I saw it before I saw 1. And I remember we went to the video store and rented 1, and all of us were just shitting our pants. Because 1 is a legit scary movie. But I found that and actually I guess the other movie that really flipped me out at that age was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think one reason Evil Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre scared me so much is they were so dirty. Not metaphorically, but literally dirty. They were really grimy, and you didn't know any of the actors, and there was no polish to them. And it really, you get this video cassette from like the store, and it would come in this like clear box because you wouldn't get the picture box when you rented it, and it was like almost like an unmarked tape, and you just felt like you were watching a snuff film or something. It's very hard for me to buy that people get scared over a movie that comes with a marketing campaign and a teaser trailer and a trailer, and the stars are doing like, press tours. It's like Blair Witch. I think one reason Blair Witch took so many people by surprise is horror in the 90s was so polished and so slick and so looked like, before the CW, it looked like the CW. And then here came this movie with nobody you'd heard of in it. It was gross and dirty, and the ad campaign was kind of weird and mysterious, and so it really worked. In terms of books, a lot of what I read is older stuff. And so this, Michael McDowell I love. I mean, Shirley Jackson. Joan Sampson's The Auctioneer is phenomenal if people haven't read it. In terms of disturbing or upsetting, I think the only book that's really done that for me is Let's Go Play at the Adams, which is a book from the 70s about this girl is babysitting these kids, and it's like one of those like balmy summers, and the neighbors are always over playing, and the parents have gone to Europe for 2 weeks, so she's babysitting the kids for like 2 weeks, and she wakes up from a nap and the kids have tied her to the bed. And like, they don't mean anything malicious. They just want to see if they can get away with it. But like, the more they get away with, the more they try to get away with. And it really gets disturbing. And actually, it's a beautiful book. By the time you get to the end is just this harrowing, gorgeous, philosophical, kind of transcendent moment and chunk of writing, but it's like I never want to read it again. It's really dark.
Well, we'll have to check that out. That sounds like my kind of book.
Yeah, well, I probably oversold it, but yeah, see what you think.
Cool. So you mentioned that horror doesn't really scare you, but how did you kind of get into this line of work?
Well, I guess I liked horror growing up. I didn't really read much of it because the covers were kind of too gross for me. Like, I mostly read like science fiction and a lot of like men's adventure, military kind of stuff when I was a kid. But I read Stephen King and Clive Barker because it was just interesting. Like, more interesting stuff happened. It was like you weren't sort of limited by the everyday. And I guess I just kind of kept reading it. I don't know. It just sort of was there, and the movies were always a lot of fun, and you found like they were just odder and stranger and weirder and more diverse. And but I guess I got into this line of work because I didn't really think I wrote horror, but the marketing department has to put something on the side of the book. So I'd written a cookbook and some YA and some other stuff, and I had a chance to pitch this horror book for Quirk, and I did, and so that's sort of where I wound up. It's weird. It kind of happened accidentally on purpose.
I really harken back to what you were saying about when a movie doesn't advertise actively about it's a horror movie. You say the 90s were really polished, and I would agree with that. And I think that's kind of a fun thing, actually, with your books that I've noticed so far. My best friend's Exorcism looks like a VHS cover, and so it kind of goes these both different ways, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, a lot of that's Quirk. They do really great cover work. Andy Reid, the art director, and Doogie Horner, they do amazing stuff. That Best Friend's Exorcism cover shouldn't look that good. They didn't have enough time to do that cover, but Doogie really had a vision for it, and really he found this artist, Hugh Fleming, and really, like, this moved way faster than it should have or would have anywhere else. The artist was literally, I will give you a sketch and go to a full painting. And usually you have time to make edits and comments. And this was really like, hold your breath, close your eyes, cross your fingers, and pray. And so, but it really turned out. So, that's not me so much. That's them. Although I love it and I encourage it and embrace it. And the Horrorstör thing, that was an issue where Andy and I were just egging each other on. They would say, oh, we want to look like an IKEA catalog, and then I'd say, well, what if we had like a different piece of furniture? Or my editor would say, let's have a different piece of furniture at the beginning of every chapter, and then I'd be like, well, what if the furniture got weirder and darker? And then if you got the furniture, you have to have catalog copy, and then if we got that, why don't we have an order form? Like, it just kept developing. And that's the nice thing about a smaller publisher is you can be more involved in that process and really grow something organic than another sort of unit on the production line.
So to kind of broaden it a little bit for me, one of my bigger questions I wanted to ask you is, what does the horror genre kind of mean to you? Why do you think people are drawn to it? What good does it do to society? Kind of the more esoteric.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't know if anything has to do any good, right? Like, what good does ballet do? Like, what good does, Westerns do? Like, I'm not sure it has to justify its existence. It exists. But the reason I like it, and I can't speak for other people, is, I like that it's not bound by the everyday, and things can really, more unexpected possibilities can arise. But also, I've really come to appreciate the fact that horror is the only genre that really sits with death and really embraces death. And, the only thing that gives our lives meaning is the fact that we die. And so this is the one genre that really is comfortable with that and spends time with that. And so that's something I really enjoy about it.
Something I've noticed with a lot of your books is that there's a lot of humor as well as the horror. How do you think those two things interplay with each other?
Well, for me, it's not very conscious. Like, I actually don't think any of my stuff is that funny. And then people are like, oh my God, that was so funny. I'm like, really? Huh? Like, to me, it's all really, really super serious when I'm writing it. Because the thing I really try to do is like apply the reality principle to everything. Like, if this really happened, what would be going on right here? And often it gets ridiculous fast. Ghosts are really, they're kind of goofy when you really sit down and think about them. And so that's sort of where I'm coming from. But I know in horror, humor is a big part and a big part of the tradition. And there's sort of two parts of that. One is that, just traditionally, horror and humor both are supposed to be about violating taboos, right? That's what gets the reaction, something that's shocking or something that's, and it can be either horrific or hilarious. And also, even physiologically, like being scared and being, and breaking into laughter, it's a lot of the same process, right? Like, it's a setup and a payoff on the page. You set it up, you pay it off, you use misdirection so that it's more unexpected, because the more unexpected the payoff is, either the more horrific and scary or the funnier it is. And, screaming and laughing, they're both supposed to be uncontrollable reflex actions. I guess crying is too, and probably orgasms. So, that's the four segments, right? Make them laugh, make them scream, make them cry, make them come, I guess.
Going in a little bit of a different direction, how do your personal fears influence your writing?
I'm scared of the same things everyone's scared of. I'm scared of the dark. I don't, underwater monsters, like that kind of stuff. But, what really, really, truly scares me is being poor. And I've been broke, and it's bad and scary, and it really crushes you. And so I think someone was pointing out that like so many characters in my book are like just scraping by in the different books. And so I think, and money's always a concern. And I kind of feel like that's how it is in real life. So I think that's how probably that interplay happens. What terrifies me is being poor and being dirty. So there you go.
So we wanted to dig into my best friend's exorcism.
Yeah, let's dig.
So I noticed that from a lot of your bios online that you're from Charleston.
Yes.
Oh, so that's where the book's set. So how much of your own high school experience done?
Oh, that's my high school. 100%.
Oh, you had a terrible high school.
Well, it's funny though. I think, it's interesting. Like whenever I see my in-laws, I'm like, they'll ask how my family is and I'll tell them stories and they're like, no, what? And then they'll tell me, they'll be like, oh, your family's so nuts. It's so crazy. And our family isn't like that at all. But then over the course of like the 3 or 4 days I'll spend with them, the same stories will come out about their family. They're just told very differently. And so I really think it's sort of what you're seeing. Like my high school had a slave day when I went there. It wasn't racial. We didn't have any black kids who went to my school. We were a traditional, upper middle class, white flight, suburban school. And so it wasn't racial, But it was, but obviously there's that uncomfortable connotation, right? But it was deeply sexist. I mean, the thing that would happen is, the boys would buy the like popular girls and like make them walk around with their like a balloon taped to their nose or like their bra worn on the outside of their blouse or something. And like, it was all just in good fun, but is it really like, so, but, I've talked to people since then, like, I mean, people have shown me pictures of them in blackface in their yearbooks from like Pennsylvania and Ohio. Like I've talked to people whose schools gave prizes for like prettiest eyes, best figure, like, just the craziest stuff, sexiest legs. I'm like, who the fuck is a sicko who gives an 18-year-old a sexiest legs award in public? That's just disturbing and depraved. So I feel like, it all depends on how you look at it, like, I loved and hated my high school in equal measures. And so that I think really comes out in that book. But I don't think it was particularly worse than anywhere else, but maybe I'm just kidding myself. No blackface. There was never blackface.
Yeah, at least there's that.
We can cling to that.
Max, did you want to ask about the possession and exorcism stuff?
Oh yeah, I could spend an entire episode on this, so get ready, Grady.
I'm ready.
So I'm kind of an amateur demonologist.
Okay.
This is my jam. I'm really fascinated by the story around the demon in particular, Andres. Spoiler alert for anyone listening. When you were writing My Best Friend's Exorcism, did you craft the story around this demon specifically, or did you just kind of stumble upon him and it kind of fit the plot?
Well, the hard thing is, in a book, you have to figure out what the bad guy wants. And so it's like, well, what does a demon want, right? Because it's pretty murky in most exorcism stories. Like why on earth does like Pazuzu or so, why do they possess a kid? Like, dude, I'd go full on. There's a great Graham Masterson book he wrote under the pseudonym Thomas Luke, where like a demon possesses the president of the United States and tries to launch a nuclear war, and they have to sneak the Pope into the Oval Office to perform an exorcism as the nuclear clock is ticking. I mean, it's really high stakes, but you're like, it's an 11-year-old girl. Who gives it? You can't even drive. Someone has to give you a ride places. And ultimately, in a possession narrative, the demoniac, the possessed person really doesn't matter, right? Like, the whole point of them being possessed is to test the faith of the exorcist. And so the books often, and the narratives often get reduced to sort of like, a young girl tied to a bed while old men shout at her. And the demoniac is just sort of this empty vessel. They're like a phone line between, the demon and the exorcist. And it so erases their identity. And so I really wanted to make sure that this was a book where like the possessed person was a person. They mattered. And whether, it doesn't matter in The Exorcist if Regan's a good kid or a bad kid. If she strangles kittens or rescues kittens, it doesn't matter. She doesn't matter. She is simply there as a battlefield for Pazuzu and the exorcist. And so I really wanted to make her matter. So then it had to be like, well, what does the demon want? Like, if they don't just want to test the exorcist, even though they do in this book, what do they want? And so I spent a lot of time, going through things like the lesser key of Solomon and stuff like that, looking for a demon. I like research. I just want to find one that worked. And when I came across Andres, first off, badass look, like naked totally. Chick with the head of an owl riding a wolf, that kind of rocks, and a sword. Totally. But also the fact that it's a demon who's concerned with disrupting harmony, with breaking friendships and ties, with destroying families and amity. Like, and I was like, well, what better demon that would sort of stand in for adolescence if you squint hard and look at it sideways, right? Like, nothing fucks up a family more than a teenager. And so it was, and you have those friendships tested, so it just fit in so perfectly. And it's nice when you find something that's like, it's like you finally get that piece of food out between your teeth, like it's been stuck there for like an hour, and it's just such this feeling of like everything is right. Everything just clicks into place when you find the right piece of a book.
And it fits so perfectly. I studied the Lesser Key of Solomon. I know the demons, and so when I figured out it was Andres, it was like, this makes perfect sense. All the discord, all of kind of the demonic attacks.
Yeah.
It all fits together, and it was really illuminating for me as a reader, which just blew my mind.
Yeah, there's this thing with writing where like often the book is smarter than you are, and the stuff that fits is supposed to be there. It sounds stupid, but like often I'll get to the end of a book and be like, shit, the last third, I am lost. And then I'll often realize the thing that bails me out is something that I already wrote earlier. Something that I wrote just sort of randomly that never pays off. Some bit of the setup that's never developed properly, or I underutilize it. All because back. So Andres really just fit, and it just was the right piece that made everything shine.
And I think it was really smart to use him as well, because the discord and kind of the contention, especially after Gretchen becomes fully possessed, you start to wonder if she really even is possessed, or if she's just being that bitchy woman that we all knew in high school.
Right. Well,
and that I thought was really clever.
Yeah, and it is something also, it's funny, I don't know how technically true it is, but there, etymologically speaking, demon is from the Greek word demos, which means teacher. Yeah. Uh-huh. And so there is an element of the demon that's teaching, right? That's applying pressure and stress to encourage you to grow and change and learn. And it's kind of what teenagers do, right? In a weird, unconscious way, they apply all this stress to everything around them to see what holds and what breaks, what you can trust and what you can't. And so it just was a neat little bit that worked.
Yeah, it was phenomenal, and I want to dive in a little bit more specifically to some of the demonic attacks, primarily the tapeworm scene with Margaret. For me, that was one of the most horrifying moments of the book. Do you want to give us some insight in how you kind of thought up those?
Yeah, well, there's always been a really heavy diet aid industry. And I've always been fascinated that you can walk into like a drugstore, like a Duane Reade or something. I'm not sure now, but I know as late as the early 2000s, late 90s, and there would be an aisle for diet aids, and it would mostly be, speed. And it's this, and I have 3 older sisters who did all kinds of experimental diets in high school and stuff. And there's the urban legend of ingesting tapeworm eggs as a weight loss technique. And I just thought the idea of just a bunch of worms churning around in your stomach is just appalling. And so, and legendarily, there's the joke that, how do you get rid of a tapeworm? You wave a piece of raw meat and it comes out. And it's just, to literalize that and apply the reality principle, it's just disgusting.
Oh, it was horrible to read that, but amazing at the same time. To kind of wrap up with my best friend's Exorcism, I was really moved by the ending of the book.
Oh, thanks.
As someone who was very religious, is not anymore, I relished in the idea that the actual exorcism had no priesthood tied to it. There was no religious affiliation. The priest eventually fails. Can you give us some insight in that?
Yeah.
Was that intentional?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I don't think people are as religious as they were even 30 years ago. So I thought like having some kind of Jesus thing and some kind of very specifically denominational aspect to the exorcism just would leave people cold. And I was sort of trying to figure out what you have faith in besides God. And I realized it's really when you're in high school, it's your friends. Like they're the ones who bail you out. They're the ones who come through in a pinch. They're the ones you turn to when all is dark. They're everything. And so that ending really came to me and I was like, okay. And then sort of jumping through in the years to show their friendship sort of existing. I've always been fascinated at the end of The Exorcist, in the movie particularly. There's all this stuff, Linda Blair's rubbing her mom's face in her bloody crotch and all this stuff. And then they're like waving goodbye, thanks for the exorcism. Come on, honey, let's have bread. I'm like, I want to see that bread. Like, Jesus, what are you going to do here? Like, everything's just normal again? And so I really wanted to take things past that end point and show how they played out. And I also realized as I was writing it that it's a way to have the exorcist also still be a hero. Like, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I grew up going to church and Sunday school and all. And so I didn't want to belittle his faith. And I like this idea that for Brother Lemon, there is a God. It's just quieter. And it's who had Gretchen meet Abby. It's how that whatever force of good, for Brother Lemon, it's God, had everything in the right place so far in advance. It was a quieter, less dramatic, less flashy kind of intervention, that everything that needed to be there that's to save her was there. And one of those things was Brother Lemon turning himself in and taking the rap for the exorcism, so neither of those girls was punished. And in a weird way, he is kind of the hero of the book. He is the one who takes the bullet so that they aren't punished for saving each other. And I like that everything sort of came together that way, and everyone sort of got the ending I thought they deserved, except for poor good dog Max.
Okay, so kind of moving out to your writing more in general, I've noticed that one of the things that makes the horror very effective in all of your books is how fleshed out the characters are. So when you're writing, how much do the characters shape the plot versus the plot shaping the characters?
Oh, that's the biggest battle, right? Like, you have ideas for all these cool set pieces and scenes and things, but really people just want to see characters. Like, no one goes, oh my God, Star Wars. Could you believe it that they blew up the Death Star? It had a weakness in it. Everyone's sitting there going, oh my God, Han Solo, he's so sexy. Oh, Darth Vader, he's so like evil, but like I kind of like him. Like, everyone's here for the characters and how they interact. And that's all that really matters. And so the more real they can be, and the more they get the bullshit of all the plot mechanics gone that are stuck in my head, like, because you imagine, oh, if this is going to happen, this has to be blah, 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 and you just paint yourself into these mechanical corners where everything's just horrible, horrible, creaking clockwork. And so the characters are really, it's something I'm on writing my next book right now, and I'm sort of at the end of it. I'm at the point where I'm like, Jesus Christ, these characters just aren't alive, and I'm having to throw out at the last minute huge chunks. It's very depressing. I wish I was a more efficient writer.
Well, as a writer, I feel your pain. So I also wanted to dig into We Sold Our Souls.
Yeah.
So I had the really surreal experience of reading your book while doing the same job as the protagonist.
Oh, so you were a night auditor?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Works as a night auditor, and I'm actually a security guard at the same hotel. So it's a fun combination.
How long have you guys been doing those jobs?
I've been doing it about 3 years.
Oh, wow. Same place?
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing, because at this point you kind of know the job, so it's like, I don't know, that must be a really, really kind of freaky thing.
Yeah, it definitely made the experience of reading it very surreal.
There was actually a lot more of her doing her job that got cut out just for pacing considerations, but there was a whole thing about, like, the hotel just doesn't feel right to her ever. And like, it has this like legend that goes around it about a guest who checked in and just wasn't in their room the next day. And there's no security footage of them leaving. And it was just a much sort of like, it was much more entrenched in this. There was like co-workers. It was much more entrenched in sort of the life of the hotel at night. But that all went out the window for pacing.
Well, I would love to read that just from the having done the job perspective.
Well, there's a weird thing about that, because at your job, are you actually the person who leaves the bills? Because I know some places the night auditor prints them, but someone else will leave them, or they share the duties, but do you actually leave them under the door?
No.
Okay. Who does that?
It all happens digitally now, so...
Oh, right. Well, because to me, that's so fucking scary. To be going down a hallway full of doors in the middle of the night, just sliding a piece of paper under each one, not knowing if it's going to, like, open or not. Or, like, you start sliding, someone grabs the paper on the other end. That would just freak me out to no end.
Well, we have to get trays in the middle of the
night. Oh, that's weird, yeah.
Yeah.
Just a long hall with a tray down halfway.
That's my job as the security guard.
Oh, the security guard has to get the trays? Oh, jeez. But, I think one of the things about hotels that's so interesting to me, and you guys would know this more, is like, it doesn't, like a lot of hotels I've been in, it doesn't go to night lighting, all of them. Like, it's just, like, there's something very weird about them. They're almost like showrooms. Everything stays the same in terms of, like, environment 24 hours a day. It's so weird.
It's very true. And it results in coworkers being very paranoid about ghosts and all sorts of weird stuff.
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense.
So I guess moving away from the hotel angle, so We Sold Our Souls is a very metal book. So What real-life music inspired you to write the novel?
Well, I wasn't a metal guy, at all. Metal's the genre I always avoided. But I knew the book had to be about metal because it's the one genre that, you say you like metal and everyone's sort of like, oh, that means you're an idiot who lives in your mom's basement. It's automatically a genre that invites judgment. And even, hip-hop, that's at least cool. Country, it's enjoyed by vast swaths of the United States. Metal is just relentlessly uncool, and the harder it tries to be cool, the more it seems uncool. And so when the book got sort of greenlit by my publisher, I had to really find my way into metal. It just wasn't my genre. And so I had a lot of people. I knew people in bands I'd grown up with and stuff, and they were really great. And I know some metal guys, and they were really great. And a friend of mine, she wrote me out a playlist. But it took me a really long time to find the song in the album that was oh, I like this. And then that takes you to the next one. And stupidly enough, it took me forever to realize that my way in was the first track from Black Sabbath's first album. And then from there, it went on to the 70s guys, and then the sort of hair metal, glam, bubblegum kind of stuff in the 80s. And from there, I went to the speed metal, Metallica and Slayer. And after that, it was sort of I started learning what I actually liked and didn't like. Don't like death metal, do like prog metal, much to my shame. So it was all a learning process for me. I mean, I'm not musical, but I took a little over 4 months of guitar lessons just to what does that feel like to have a guitar and play a guitar, and how does that feel on your body and stuff. So it was a lot of, one of the things I like about writing books is a lot of fun to sort of go into these worlds that aren't normally yours, and learn about them and really have to emotionally invest in them. I mean, there's a couple of albums that I just can't listen to anymore because I listened to them so much while writing We Sold Our Souls, which was not a happy process for me. Then now that I'm done, it's just they're too emotional. I get really, it sounds so sissy, but I just get way too overwhelmed when I listen to those cuts again.
Right. So there's definitely a metalhead subgenre of horror. Why metal, and why do you think it kind of works so well with horror?
Well, metal really, from the beginning, embraced sort of a horror movie aesthetic. I mean, Black Sabbath is named after the Mario Bava movie. So it's always been kind of hand in hand. And I feel in the 80s, when you had the Moral Majority on the right and the Satanic Panic, a lot of metal bands really felt pushed into a corner, and they sort of doubled down on that horrific element, right? They were oh, if you think our last album was horrible, wait until you hear the next one. We're really going to go for broke with that one. And then, it branched out into all the subgenres and stuff. But I just think it was right there from the beginning. This idea that this was a musical form whose visual expression was horror iconography. And that's just always been a part of it. I mean, it's the same way that heavy music, when you look at Led Zeppelin and all those bands, that come off from that, they embrace a real, there's a real Tolkien kind of thing going on there. It's just baked into the DNA from the beginning.
Right. So now changing gears to another book again, why did you decide to have an Ikea or Ikea equivalent be haunted for Horrorstör?
Well, that was really a case of a haunted Ikea is funny. And it's something you want to read about a haunted Ikea. And, there is, and I made it Orsk because at the last minute, the publisher had a real panic attack about getting sued. But even before then, I wanted to make it not Ikea because I wanted to really explore the idea of work being a kind of punishment, retail work being kind of horrifying and torturous. And there was that whole 19th century thing with penitentiaries where it was this idea that work could redeem your soul. Work was virtuous, and doing physical labor was good for your soul. And for these horrible criminals, it was the best thing they could do. But then they made these things like a treadmill. But instead of walking on a treadmill and it was connected to millstones that ground grain, or turning a crank that turned a machine, the crank was just in a box of gears that turned nothing. The treadmill was connected to nothing. And this idea of divorcing labor from actual productive work, and you just do this endless labor, it's horrible, it's cruel, it's sadistic, it's soul crushing. But I interviewed a little over a dozen IKEA employees to write the book, and they all really genuinely like their job. Like, IKEA is a really fair employer. They pay above minimum wage in a lot of cases. Everyone felt like for a retail job, they were really treated like a human being. And I didn't want to take the trust these people had given me to share details about their job and their relationship to it. And then say, and they work for IKEA, which is the dark Satan at the center of a retail hell. So I really wanted to make it somewhere that was like an IKEA knockoff already.
Horrorstör and My Best Friend's Exorcism have both been optioned for adaptation. So I guess, are you going to be involved in those projects at all? And do you know, like, when we're going to be seeing those or anything like that?
You tell me, man. Hollywood moves very slowly, and I'm as involved as you can be involved. But, I'm the lowest guy on the totem pole. Like, I wrote the books. Like, if there's a meeting of everyone involved in Horrorstör, I'll be the guy. I'll be like the least powerful person in that room, and I'll be asked to go get coffee. Not literally, but figuratively. Like, it's just, so I'm the last person to know. I mean, fingers crossed, but we'll see. This stuff moves so slowly.
Well, they need to move faster.
I wish.
You've been working in film writing. Can you tell us a little bit about Mohawk and Satanic Panic?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I actually, a friend of mine, Ted Gagan, who did this movie called We're Still Here, he was doing his second movie, and he had really wanted to make Mohawk, but the producers didn't, and they wanted him to do something else. And I've written screenplays a ton and had things optioned or blobbing around, and nothing ever paying that much or getting very far. But just, I don't know, maybe not my foot in the door, but my foot was on the pavement that leads to the steps that lead to the walkway that led to the door. And so I was actually working on a screenplay that would become Satanic Panic. And I said to Ted, if I just made some changes, this might be the project that really works for you. And so he and I worked on it some. And then he got this call. I think it was January 22nd. And it was so we're going to have a crew shooting a movie in Saskatchewan. And so we want to make Mohawk off the back of that because they're already going to be there and they're going to be fully ready to do period stuff and ready to rock and roll. And so Ted turned to me. He's like, do you know anything about the War of 1812, which is when it's set? He only had a 3-paragraph pitch for the movie. And I was like, well, yes, I happen to be a big buff for the War of 1812 because I love the War of 1812 because it's the stupidest war ever. And I've wanted to do a War of 1812 project for a long time. And so that helped. And it really helped because we only had 6 weeks to go from that 3-paragraph outline to a screenplay and a fully done script that was, and it was, that was January 20, I think it might have been the 22nd when we got the phone call, and they were rolling cameras in May, end of May. So it was an insanely short pre-production process. And then when that was done, I still had Satanic Panic, and I was using it as a writing sample, and it got picked up by the folks at Fango.
Well, definitely looking forward to seeing that one as well.
Me too. it's wrapped, and I'm curious to see the final version.
Can you give us any tidbit of what you're working on now?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm working on now is a book I've wanted to write for a long time, and it's sort of the end of a era for me. It's the last book on my contract with Quirk, and I'll probably still work with Quirk, but it's just the last of this chunk. And my editor at Quirk has left, and so there's a new editor there now. So he was a big part of the process for all these, and there's books I want to write moving forward that are still horror, but they're very different. The only way to learn how to write books is by writing them. And so every time you write a book, you want to do something new and different. And so it'll always be my stuff, but I really want to do something radically different with the next book. And so this book's sort of the end of a chunk for me. And I don't want to say what it's about, except that, it's not a sequel to My Best Friend's Exorcism, but it's set in the same neighborhood, and it's set about 5 years later, and none of the same characters are in it, but it's the same kind of people. And because I really wanted to write after My Best Friend's Exorcism, a lot of people would come up to me and say, oh my God, Gretchen's parents were the worst. And I was like, yeah, but there's another version of this story where here's two parents and something's really wrong with their daughter and they're terrified and they don't know how to stop it. And she's getting worse and worse. And whenever her best friend comes around, it gets really bad. And they don't have the tools to cope with this and they don't know what to do. And they're really trying hard to do their best, but they're just out of their depth. And so this is a book about parents, basically, and sort of what the things they do when we're kids that we're not aware of to keep us safe. And it's about vampires.
That was one of my biggest critiques about my best friend's Exorcism, is I felt that the parents were not 100% realistic. You know, there was a lot of negativity coming from them. So if we can get, their side of the story, I think it will flesh out my opinion of the book even more.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that is the book is told from Gretchen and Abby's point of view, and specifically Abby's. And so the parents are just these horror shows because that's how they seem to her, right? They're just terrible. And there was actually a little bit more with her parents and sort of her reconciling with them and really, growing at the very end when it's sort of she's growing older, like really making peace with them and stuff. But for pacing reasons, it just came out. But yeah, no, I agree with you. And one of the funny things about writing this current book is one of the big criticisms I'm getting is the kids are so shitty and like awful. And I'm like, yes, because to a parent, your kids are shitty and awful. Like they love their parents love their kids, but they don't like them necessarily. Like, a 14-year-old is a horrible thing to have on your hands. They're ungrateful, they're selfish, they're disrespectful, they don't appreciate anything you do for them. They do stupid things. They're basically brain-damaged lunatics in your house. So it's hard to find the balancing ground, right?
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it was funny. One of the reasons in Best Friend's Exorcism that they're in 10th grade is I remember 10th grade being a particularly hard year. And when I was going through old yearbooks from high school, it's like middle school, elementary, like middle school and then high school. Like, people write in the year, oh, have a great summer. It was cool to sit next to you in algebra. You're a neat person. And then suddenly in 10th grade, like the inscriptions just exploded into these like half-page long epics with all these inside jokes. And it's like suddenly in 10th grade, you develop a personality. And I talked to some of my high school teachers and they're like, oh, we never want to teach 10th grade. It's like suddenly every single kid just loses their mind and is insane. And so like, there's just this, so you have a lot of fun waiting for you ahead.
Especially since I'm going to be a high school English teacher soon.
Oh my God, really? That's bonkers.
It is what it is.
No, I think it's amazing. Listen, I wouldn't have gotten through high school without my English teacher. Like, she really went to the mat for me more than once to keep me in school and like enrolled. And it was the only class that didn't make me completely and totally miserable. So you were going to be bailing out some depressed, messed up, weird kids. Good for you.
Sounds right up his alley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be the real life horror for the podcast.
Exactly.
All right, so I guess to wrap things up, is there anything that you want to shamelessly plug? Where can people find your work or you online?
Yeah, I mean, I keep everything at GradyHendrix.com. Like, everything I do, you can find my dumb social media platforms and all that crap there. And no, I just, I'm just really grateful people read this stuff. I sit in my stinky little office and write, and it's amazing to me that these people I make up go out and make friends and get in trouble and have adventures.
Well, keep doing it.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate it.
Oh, thanks.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at Scream Kings Pod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/Scream Kings. Stay spooky.